He can feel it coming. The heat on the back of his neck. The racing beat of his heart. The sudden urge to run. That's when Mark Ferrand starts counting.
I look around and I say, what are 5 things that I can see? I can see the Christmas lights, I can see the red umbrellas.
Counting those things is like finding anchors in a storm. Standing in a crowded place is a form of self-inflicted torture and a form of therapy too. Ferrand is exposing himself to the ravaging fear that consumes his life, all in an effort to beat it.
I don't like being here. I don't know, I feel like it's some kind of primitive emotion, some kind of primitive response. Honestly, that's what it feels like, right? You're just fighting this thing that's saying, get out, go, leave.
Ferrand has PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and why he struggles with the demons in his mind is a story you don't often hear. You see, Ferrand isn't a former soldier or frontline emergency worker. He's a former juror, and now he's the one looking for justice.
Do I regret doing jury work? At the end of the day, no. Do I regret that I'm sick because of it? Yes. Yes.
Ferrand didn't know what to expect when he got the summons and ended up serving on a Toronto murder trial 2 years ago. The victim, 23-year-old Karina Petrach. The killer, her boyfriend, Farshad Badakhshan. The loop still lurks in the shadows of his mind, ready to pounce into focus. Autopsy photos of a young woman stabbed repeatedly, her throat slit, burns all over her body from being trapped in a room set on fire. Testimony of how she managed to crawl out, bleeding to death, gasping for help.
The pathway of her final moments up the stairs and the bloody marks on the walls, and there were some images in the bathroom which were really disturbing, bloody handprints and blood on the floor and blood in the kitchen where she laid for a period. And you might read about it in a crime novel, but it's not. It's totally different when it's real. This is a real person. This is a real victim.
So real and so disturbing that during the trial, Ferrand would wake up at night in a cold sweat. But he figured that was normal, that when the trial was over, it would all be over. He was wrong.
I would be talking to somebody and then I would look at their neck and see that image.
The flashbacks kept coming. Then the fear set in.
I slept like a guard dog at the foot of my daughter's bed. I would sleep as close to the door in her room as possible. And then I kept a knife underneath my pillow.
Terror became a constant, gnawing companion. Finally, months later, he reached out for help. The first place he called was the courthouse.
There was a sort of dull silence on the end of the phone. Oh, we're not quite sure about that. And then, humming and hawing about it. There wasn't really, it became clear there wasn't a body that dealt with jurors.
And that is the stark reality in most of the country. Jury duty is a civic duty, and every day, ordinary people are required by law to immerse themselves in grisly trials and endure an onslaught of disturbing evidence. There is no way to prepare for it, no way to look away. And when it's over, the majority of jurors in Canada are simply thanked for their time and dismissed.
So how was your day today?
It's good. It's something that, everybody asked. When I got home, so did they put you in touch with a counselor? No. People at work asked, so what's the support you get? Nothing. It was simply thank you, see you later.
Dan Kozine remembers feeling oddly deflated, thinking, is that it? Kozine spent weeks absorbing the facts of a horrific murder trial in Regina last year, one that had even veteran police officers testifying in tears. Foster parents Kevin and Tammy Goforth were convicted of abusing and neglecting 2 little girls in their care.
A lot of it stemmed around malnutrition and
They weren't feeding them?
that they weren't feeding them sufficiently or giving them enough fluids. Some of the things were, there was a lot of question around whether or not they were, locked in their room on their own, whether their diapers were changed regularly, whether they had even sufficient blankets or things like that.
The evidence included photos of clothing soiled with feces and duct tape. The court heard it was used to restrain the older girl, who was 4 years old. She died of severe malnutrition. Her 2-year-old sister barely survived. She's the one who haunts Cozine the most.
You would think it would be, autopsy photos of a 4-year-old girl, or her hospital photos before she passed away, or some of those things. But there was a close-up photo of the 2-year-old's face, and you could feel how painful it was for her. Wasn't a lot of injuries shown in that picture. It was just a close-up of her face, but sadness and being tired and overwhelmed, and a 2-year-old and not understanding. And there's lots of pictures that are, you think of, but that one for me is the one that's present.
When it was over, Cozine was determined to push the images out of his mind, determined to get back to his normal life. And then he saw the children.
Morning, boys.
Cozine is the principal at St. Jerome Elementary School in Regina.
Morning, guys. During that trial, these kids were too young to be in school. And I often thought about, even if they were a year or two older, then maybe they would have been in school then, and maybe somebody would have noticed. Or did you wear mitts today?
I have some with pockets.
Cozine and his wife don't have children. He calls his students his kids. But he found himself unusually withdrawn from them, and distracted too. When he did focus, he was hypervigilant. He recalls the day a little girl came into the school office with a cut on her finger.
The first reaction is, well, how did that happen? And you start to, you're looking at it and, well, maybe it's because of this, and I saw that in those pictures. And you start to really go to a place where that's not what it was. But it takes you there. Okay, have a good day, buddy.
There was a lot of withdrawal. He was sad, right? Angry, for sure. I saw lots of moments of anger, for sure.
At his wife Vanessa's urging, Cozine found a therapist and was diagnosed with PTSD.
It seems really archaic given today's society and the awareness around mental health. There seems to be a lack of recognition that this is the effect that it's going to have on these people when they leave that courtroom.
Support for jurors varies across the country. Saskatchewan doesn't have a policy in place, while Alberta offers free counseling automatically to those who need it. In some provinces, judges can order counseling for jurors, but those orders are rare.
Why do you think this wasn't a bigger issue before?
Because it didn't happen before. At least I wasn't aware, and I think most judges weren't aware of the dramatic impact it would have on juries.
Christopher Spire is a retired Ontario Superior Court judge. In nearly 30 years on the bench, Spire presided over dozens of murder trials, and over the years came to appreciate how jurors can often be traumatized.
Well, I want to put this in perspective. Right? Previously, in bygone days, in serious cases, the Crown would always tender photographs of perhaps the victim and to demonstrate the cause of death. But those were somewhat benign and they were somewhat limited, and they had to be relevant, of course, to a fact and issue. What's really changed today in many cases is trials are longer, exposure by jurors to acts of depravity may very well have a serious emotional effect on a juror. All people are very different, and on some it would have very little impact. On others, it would have a dramatic impact.
In some cases, there is no question the evidence will have an impact.
The ordeal began in earnest today for jurors in the murder trial.
One of the first times a judge ordered counseling for jurors was after the Paul Bernardo murder trial in Toronto in 1995.
The sound of Leslie Mahaffey begging, Kristen French screaming, the videotapes, shown only to the jury.
The torture and rape videotapes of two teenage girls, recorded by Bernardo at his home with his wife at the time, Carla Homolka, were so searing, just as Patrick Lesage anticipated the jurors would need support. Lesage himself sought counseling after the trial.
Justice Lesage, who is a great, great judge, has said publicly the impact it's had on him, seeing the videos of such depraved conduct. And he sought counseling. So if it can happen to a judge with long experience, a person who prosecuted many murder cases, it can happen especially to a juror off the street, doesn't know what to expect.
But what does happen to those jurors off the street? There's no way of knowing how many people unravel and to what extent. Most simply disappear into the crowd.
The problem is this: a judge's function is finished after the verdict and after the sentence. So any emotional effects that happen, say, 2 weeks later, 2 days later, 2 months later, we never know about it, and we've exhausted our jurisdiction.
And to your point, you wouldn't know as a judge what happens after.
Never.
And if these people don't have anywhere to turn after they're dismissed and thanked for their time, it could be an invisible issue, right? Until somebody decides to say something.
Precisely.
I'm angry at the whole damn system.
This juror's identity is under a publication ban. She spoke to CBC News about her emotional ordeal last fall. The woman served on the murder trial of 8-year-old Victoria Stafford.
The court has heard that Tori was killed by blows to the head, and today they saw the graphic results of the attack.
The little girl was lured away from her school in Woodstock, Ontario, sexually assaulted and killed. Michael Rafferty and Terry Lynn McClintock were convicted of first-degree murder.
I was reliving the trial, but I was reliving it in the place where I was standing there at the crime scene watching it happen over and over and over again.
The judge did order counseling, but the juror said it amounted to little more than relaxation exercises. She kept shutting down, unable to work or care for her children, and was diagnosed with PTSD. The juror launched a court appeal demanding compensation from the Ontario government. Days before the case was to be heard, it was settled out of court, and the Attorney General went further. He announced Ontario would set up a helpline and offer free counseling to all traumatized jurors. It's not clear yet what form that counseling will take. The new policy goes into effect at the end of this month.
I'm so grateful that he took the issue as seriously as he did and took steps.
Mark Ferrand has also been lobbying Ontario for more support and welcomes the new policy. But he's not stopping there. He's set up a Facebook page to give other traumatized jurors a voice, and he's writing every Attorney General in Canada, urging them to do more.
I want the same level of support to be available to a juror in any province, in any territory in the country. There should be no juror looking over the fence and saying, well, why do they have services and we don't?
Being the public face of the cause is a welcome reprieve from his private hell. Ferrand has been able to keep working as a market researcher, but he won't elaborate on his life at home with his wife and 2 small children. other than to say it's shattered.
Come on in.
He's trying to piece it all back together. Ferrand sees Vivian Lee, a behavioral therapist, once a week.
What are you afraid will happen if you let yourself be vulnerable?
I'm emotional. I cry. I'm trying not to cry. People are sympathetic. People want to hug you, and that's the other problem. Like, I don't like being touched. I don't like. Right now. That's a problem, right? We know that. I think we have to stop this. I think I'm done.
It's a slow, painful process, and Ferrand didn't want us to capture more than a few minutes of it. And then there's the cost. Ferrand's work insurance plan only covers a fraction of the sessions. And for all his advocacy work, it's not clear if Ontario's new support program will be retroactive, whether he will benefit from it in any way. How long will it take to feel normal again? Will he? Once again, Ferrand finds himself in the same busy square, once again, willing himself to get better, and so afraid he won't.
It's still a nightmare. I'm not well. I have a. I have good days and I have bad days. And, I'm hoping that at a certain point I will be able to, there will be some sort of mechanic in me that is just survival mode. I struggle with all of this still. I'm still not out of this.
Life, as he knew it, is altered forever. And after helping serve justice, it remains defined by the search for his own. Joanna Brumeliotis, CBC News, Toronto.